I would beat the living shit out of him. And if he wants to fight, I'll fight him any day of the week and I'll fucking wreck him. And he knows that.
So this is your offer. $3 million. You put three, I put three. Winner takes all.
Jake Paul, the so-called boxing prodigy, has a reputation for taking on all challengers. But when Andrew Tate, the former kickboxing world champion, threw down a $3 million bet for a fight, Jake's response was nothing less than deafening silence. No words, no contract, just a cold, calculated avoidance of the biggest challenge of his career. Why? Tate is younger, stronger, and more unpredictable than anyone Jake has ever faced. And deep down, Jake knows it. Instead of stepping into the ring with Tate, he hides behind an excuse and fights a 57-year-old Mike Tyson, a legend who's long past his prime. Tate's offer was simple, $3 million, anytime, any place. But Jake Paul, who's built an entire career on fighting older, slower, and less dangerous opponents, simply couldn't handle a real test. The internet erupted in fury. Fans, critics, and even Jake's most loyal followers began to question his so-called fighting career. Why is Jake Paul fighting men who have no business being in the ring with him, yet refuses to face someone like Andrew Tate, who has been in the trenches of real combat sports for years? Andrew Tate didn't just challenge Jake Paul for the money, he dared him to step up and prove he's more than just a social media sensation with a good punch. Tate knew exactly what Jake would do, run, and that's exactly what happened. Jake Paul is afraid to fight Tate because deep down, he knows he's not the fighter he claims to be. He's a businessman playing a game, and when the stakes get real, he backs down. The question now is clear. Is Jake Paul really a fighter, or is he just another hype machine too scared to face someone who could actually expose him? The world is watching, and the silence from Jake Paul is louder than any punch he's ever thrown. Jake Paul has built his entire boxing career on one thing: control. Control over who he fights, control over the narrative, and most importantly, control over how he's seen by the public. But the cracks are starting to show, and it's getting harder for Jake to hide behind his carefully crafted image. He's avoided real competition at every turn, cherry-picking opponents that are either past their prime, out of their depth, or just plain unqualified. And now, with Andrew Tate throwing down the gauntlet, Jake's true colors are starting to bleed through. Instead of facing Tate, Jake Paul turns to the most calculated fight possible: Mike Tyson. Sure, Tyson is a legend in the sport, but let's be real. Tyson is 57 years old and hasn't been in his prime for decades. But for Jake, this is the perfect opponent. A big name, easy to market, but with enough of a gap in skill and speed to make Jake look like the superior fighter. It's not a real challenge. It's a spectacle. It's a fight that sells pay-per-views, not one that tests Jake's limits, and he knows it. Andrew Tate, on the other hand, represents a completely different kind of danger. He's in his mid-30s, still in peak fighting shape, and he has decades of combat sports experience under his belt. This isn't some washed-up celebrity. This is a real fighter with real skills, and that's why Jake Paul is dodging him. He doesn't want to risk his undefeated record. He doesn't want to put his perfect image in jeopardy. The idea of facing someone like Tate, who isn't just in it for the money but to prove a point, scares him. The moment he steps into the ring with Tate, the script gets ripped up. He can't control the outcome, and that's the one thing Jake can't afford. Jake's entire career has been built on avoiding real tests. From former basketball players to retired MMA fighters who've never boxed before, Jake has strategically chosen fights where the odds are stacked in his favor. He's not fighting the best, he's fighting the easiest. And with every fight, he reinforces the idea that he's not interested in proving himself as a legitimate boxer, but rather as a businessman who knows how to sell a fight. But with Andrew Tate's challenge hanging over him, Jake's undefeated record is starting to look more like a carefully curated marketing stunt than a legitimate achievement. Tate's challenge is the test that Jake Paul has been running from his entire career. It's not about money, it's about legacy. But Jake's silence is all the proof anyone needs to see. He's afraid of what would happen if he actually had to fight a real fighter. Jake Paul's fear of facing Andrew Tate didn't just reveal his reluctance to step up in the ring, it exposed the biggest lie about his entire boxing career. For years, Jake has built himself up as the next big thing in boxing, the undefeated fighter who takes on all comers. But when it came down to actually proving himself against a legitimate opponent, Jake took the coward's way out. Instead of accepting the $3 million bet from Andrew Tate, he found a new target: Mike Tyson, an aging boxing icon who's more a name than a threat at this stage in his career. This is the moment where the curtain gets pulled back. Jake Paul's carefully constructed image begins to crumble, and the truth is harder to ignore. He's not a fighter. He's a brand, a product designed for clicks, likes, and pay-per-views. But when it comes to getting into the ring with someone who actually poses a challenge, Jake Paul has no answer. Andrew Tate isn't just another celebrity calling out Jake for clout. He's a real fighter with a legacy, someone who has spent years in the ring facing actual competition. Tate isn't interested in playing Jake's game. He doesn't need a scripted fight or a PR stunt to make his name. He's already proven himself. That's why Jake won't fight him. The moment he steps into the ring with Tate, the illusion collapses. All the hype, all the promotion, all the talk about being a boxing prodigy, none of it would matter when he's facing someone who could actually beat him. And Jake knows that. And the more he dodges Tate, the more he proves that he's terrified of being exposed. He's terrified of someone who could end the myth of Jake Paul as a legitimate boxer. Jake's fans are starting to wake up, and the backlash is real. His refusal to fight Tate isn't just a missed opportunity, it's the beginning of the end for the undefeated persona he's worked so hard to build. Fans are calling him out, and the internet is roasting him alive. No amount of money, no flashy promotions, no PR spin can cover up the fact that Jake Paul is afraid of fighting a real competitor. This fight wasn't just about money or the spectacle, it was about Jake Paul's very identity, and by running from it, he exposed himself as nothing more than a fraud in the ring. The longer Jake avoids real competition, the more he proves that he's just another businessman playing a dangerous game. Andrew Tate isn't going anywhere, and neither is the spotlight on Jake's glaring fear. The next time Jake steps into the ring, it better be with someone who can challenge him, because the world is watching and they're starting to see through the act. While Jake Paul continues to dodge legitimate competition, Andrew Tate is proving that real fighters don't run, they rise. Tate is not some internet personality looking for a quick payday. He's a fighter with a legacy, a former world kickboxing champion who has lived the life of a combat athlete. His call out to Jake wasn't just about proving a point, it was about exposing the truth. Tate isn't interested in fake fights or carefully planned spectacles. He wants a real challenge, one that will test both his skill and his opponent's heart. And that's exactly what Jake Paul is avoiding. Tate isn't just a man of words, he's a man of action. Every challenge he throws is backed up by years of experience and a career filled with real opponents, not retired fighters or washed-up celebrities. Jake Paul, on the other hand, has built his career by fighting men who are no longer in their prime or are outside their element. His victory over a former basketball player or a retired MMA fighter who's never boxed a day in their life doesn't add up to real boxing accolades. When Tate challenged Jake, it was a moment that demanded a response, but Jake had none. Instead of accepting the fight, he hid behind excuses, fighting someone who has not been competitive in the ring for decades. He wasn't interested in proving that he could take on a true fighter like Tate, someone who has been tested time and time again. The fight with Mike Tyson wasn't a test of skill or courage. It was a marketing ploy, a way for Jake to protect his image while pretending to be a fighter. Andrew Tate's legacy as a fighter is undeniable. His name is recognized in combat sports circles around the world. He's not some flash-in-the-pan YouTuber. He's a proven fighter who has dedicated his life to perfecting his craft. And when he called out Jake Paul, it wasn't just to boost his own profile. It was to prove that Jake's career, built on hype and controlled fights, is nothing more than smoke and mirrors. The question is now clear. Can Jake Paul ever truly be considered a fighter if he continues to avoid challenges like this? Can he call himself a champion when he's too afraid to step into the ring with someone who could actually beat him? Andrew Tate's challenge has cast a long shadow over Jake Paul's entire career, and no amount of clever promotions or pay-per-view stunts can erase that. Jake's image is crumbling because of one simple truth. He's not a fighter in the same way that Tate is. And no matter how much he tries to control the narrative, he can't escape the fact that he's running from the fight that matters most. The world is watching and the clock is ticking. Jake Paul has been on a high building his brand and playing the part of the undefeated fighter, but with each day that passes, his refusal to step up against Andrew Tate is starting to eat away at his credibility. The facade is beginning to crumble, and Jake's reputation is hanging by a thread. He's cornered. He can keep hiding behind flashy PR campaigns and scripted fights, or he can finally take a real challenge and risk everything. The question is, will he take the leap, or will his career fall into oblivion? Every fighter knows that in order to be remembered, they have to take risks. Real fighters take on the toughest opponents, step into the ring knowing they might lose, but determined to prove they're the best. Jake Paul has avoided that. He's fought old men, non-boxers, and people who have no business being in the ring with him. But Tate's challenge is different. It's the kind of fight that would either cement Jake's place as a legitimate boxer or expose him as a fraud. The problem is, Jake is terrified of that risk. He knows that facing Tate is no joke. Tate's unpredictability, his physical prime, and his years of experience make him a dangerous opponent. And Jake knows deep down, if he takes that fight, there's a real chance he could lose. That's a gamble Jake Paul is not willing to take. Not when his image, his brand, and his reputation as an undefeated champion are all on the line. But by continuously avoiding it, Jake is only digging a deeper hole for himself. His fans are growing restless, and the backlash is growing louder. Even some of his most loyal supporters are starting to question his integrity. Jake Paul has built his entire career on being the tough guy, the fighter who takes on all challengers. But this is the moment where his actions will define his legacy. The internet is savage, and the silence from Jake's camp is deafening. Fans and critics alike are waiting for him to respond, waiting for him to either put up or shut up. Every time he dodges a real fight, he loses a piece of his credibility. The hype is fading. The fans who once praised his hustle are starting to see the cracks in the armor. And if he doesn't take this fight with Tate, it's only a matter of time before the narrative changes from Jake Paul, the rising star, to Jake Paul, the scared celebrity who avoided a real fight. Andrew Tate has already done his part. He's put the challenge out there, made his case, and proved his worth as a fighter. Now, the ball is in Jake's court. If he continues to hide, if he turns his back on a real competitor like Tate, his legacy will be forever tainted. He'll be remembered not as the man who conquered the boxing world, but as the man who only fought when the odds were stacked in his favor. The question remains, will Jake Paul finally prove himself as a real fighter, or will his silence speak louder than his punches ever could? Jake Paul's story is at a crossroads. He's built an empire of hype, carefully curated to make fans believe in the narrative of the fearless fighter who takes on all challengers. But the challenge from Andrew Tate has shattered that illusion. By avoiding Tate, Jake Paul isn't just dodging a fight, he's dodging the truth. And the truth is, his career was never about proving himself as a legitimate boxer. It was about building a brand. But here's the problem. The world doesn't care about Jake Paul's brand anymore. The internet is unforgiving, and fans are getting smarter. They're no longer buying into the scripted fights and the carefully controlled narratives. They want authenticity. They want to see Jake Paul face a real challenge. And if he continues to refuse, that image of the fearless boxer will quickly unravel, leaving him exposed as nothing more than a businessman who's terrified of the real fight. The longer Jake continues to avoid fighters like Andrew Tate, the deeper he digs himself into a hole he may never get out of. His reputation is on the line. The world is waiting for him to make a choice. Step up and face the truth, or continue to hide behind the safety of cherry-picked opponents. Every day that passes, every moment of silence from Jake Paul is another nail in the coffin of his credibility. The hype will fade. The fans will move on, and when they do, Jake Paul will be remembered not for his punches, but for his fear. Andrew Tate is the real deal, a fighter who doesn't need a scripted narrative to make a name. He's earned his place through years of hard work, and he's not going to stop calling out the frauds of the world. Jake Paul's refusal to fight Tate will haunt him. His entire career, built on spectacle and hype, will be defined by this moment. There's no hiding from it. So Jake, the question is simple. What kind of fighter do you want to be remembered as? The man who dodged the fight of his career, or the man who stepped into the ring and finally proved he could go the distance? The ball is in your court, but be careful. Once the truth comes out, it's impossible to put back in the box.